Welcome to the Authentic Wife Show. I'm Beth Rolls, a conscious marriage coach and author of The Authentic Wife, Uncaging Yourself Through Marriage. I help driven moms who love their kids more than they hate their marriage use the conflict in their relationship to become their most authentic selves so they can create a relationship and life they don't want to escape from. Stop waiting for your husband to evolve and start making every day feel like a vacation. You can find my book, tons of free resources, and Happily Ever After, the only marriage-saving coaching program, on my website, theauthenticwifeandmom.com. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Shannon, thank you for being here today. I'm really looking forward to picking your brain and getting all of your expertise on this. So you have a very interesting set of credentials and a big background in social work and stuff. How did you become an expert in healing from toxic relationships?
Thanks, Beth. Thanks for having me on. It's been an interesting journey. I think that I originally wanted to be a doctor my whole childhood, but became interested in really more how relationships and people work and went into grad school in social work instead. So it was in those early days. Actually, I even before grad school, part of what drove me to grad school was working in the domestic violence field and working in a domestic violence shelter, working with the kids and the women, and was really intrigued, but felt like we weren't helping enough. And so I really wanted to understand better what was going on. And in learning about that, that drove me to grad school. So in grad school, I learned about all the different aspects of people and relationships. And then I've been in the field for about 35 years.
Mm.
In that time, I've worked with individuals and couples and families, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I developed a YouTube channel because I felt like I had a lot of information to share. Sharing it one person, 1 hour at a time seemed kind of minimal. And I wanted to there would just seem like millions of people in the world that didn't have any access to mental health therapy or help or a lot of the strategies and insights that I've gathered. And in sharing on YouTube, what I found was that people were most intrigued by and most curious and bothered by their relationships, and mostly about narcissistic and other toxic and abusive relationships. So that became my focus. And over the past year, I realized that just 10 minutes of a video or even an hour live stream every other week, which I do, wasn't enough to help people really deal with and heal from these kinds of relationships. So I wrote a book and I completed that and published it in May.
Wow.
And it's called Out of the Fog into the Clear, journaling to help you heal from toxic relationships. And it's all about really understanding what happened, what's going on, understanding what's toxic and what's not, and also how to set boundaries, how to be fully present in a relationship to see if it can get better and to see if you can have boundaries within the relationship. And then if not, then t- understanding how to be good to yourself and take care of yourself and get free from it.
Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations on the book. I love that you made it like a journal to really help people do the work on their own. That's wonderful. Speaking of boundaries, I think that one of the biggest problems we have in our world today is such a lack of boundaries, not only for the people who are violating other people's boundaries, but especially for women who don't even know, that they are separate from the other person and knowing what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. One of the things that my clients, one of the first challenges is when they're holding boundaries and their husband, I don't have anybody who's being physically abused. I should probably make that clear. Their husband is, pouting, blaming them, walking away, threatening to leave, doing all this, like I call it kind of tantruming. What do you recommend to your patients who are struggling with that after holding the boundary and dealing with his sort of tantrum?
That's a great question, Beth. I think that one of the things that we have to recognize as women that oftentimes we are really trained from the get go to be placating, peacekeeping, and people pleasing a lot. And that is not authentic. And I love the title of your show. That's why I wanted
Yeah.
to be a part of it.
Thank
And
you.
it really is not authentic. We're called on to tell the truth in love. And I think when we do set boundaries, we also have to recognize that I'm not responsible for another person's emotions. So when a boundary is how I protect myself or take care of myself within a relationship. So it can be as simple as, when you were talking to me that way, I'm going to walk away or hang up the phone or leave the house or what have you. And so kind of like a grown up timeout. So you're talking about a tantrum, and it's kind of like a grown up timeout to separate yourself emotionally and even physically from a person who's having a tantrum at whatever age. And that's a beautiful thing because you're not getting into a battle with them. You're just disconnecting and you're just letting them know that there is a boundary. So when it either works because that person gets tired of having timeout and they stop the behavior, or it works because it lets you know what's really going on in the relationship. And sometimes it does escalate a person. And then you really have to separate emotionally and maybe physically and let them know I'm not responsible for your emotional outbursts. I'm responsible for myself and my own boundaries. It's challenging, but I think I've noticed that oftentimes couples want the same things and they're just not communicating that very well. And so when one person gets clean and clear in their boundaries and in their authenticity, then the other person has a chance to grow and become more clean and clear in their boundaries and authenticity. So it can be really a growth thing. And I think we as women often feel guilty for setting boundaries. And if we can get past that guilt and just realize that this was God's way. He wants us to tell the truth in love. He doesn't ask us to be placaters and peacekeepers and people pleasers. He asks us to be our whole selves the way he created us to be.
Mm, I love that. I love it. And so what I hear really is like the boundary, the initial boundary might be, this doesn't work for me or walking away or something. But it sounds like the boundary doesn't end there. Even though they begin to throw the tantrum, we continue to hold that boundary and not let that impact us or take that on or placate or please them. Yeah. It is getting over that guilt and that conditioning we have that says, no, go fix him, go make him feel better. This must reflect on you. I think the fear of them even when things are bad, I've noticed that I'll have clients who go into so much fear of, "Oh, but then he's gonna leave. Now I need to go repair because he's threatening to leave." And I have to say, "Well, you know, that's his choice if he decides to leave." But what I have experienced and what I've seen is that mostly those are just empty threats. Like you said, they usually want the same thing, and they try to use that fear to manipulate and get different action. What about physical abuse? I don't take clients who are being physically abused, but in your opinion, what is the best boundary for physical abuse? Is that you leave the first time or and give 'em no more chances? How does that play out?
I think you absolutely have to leave physically. And typically what I've seen over the years is that tendency to manipulate and control and to be all about selves is kind of ingrained. And that what you have to look at, and I would really suggest and recommend people look at this early in a relationship, is that person respecting, honoring, cherishing all of you, your thoughts, feelings, wants, needs, dreams, aspirations, or are they all about themselves? If they're all about themselves and you are only cherished when you are placating, people pleasing, and peacekeeping, then that's not a whole relationship. They're not actually loving you. They are loving themselves and feeding their own little ego with you. So you have to be conscious of that in the beginning of a relationship and steer clear of that person. But given if you are in a relationship with a person like that, and when you stop placating, they explode and become violent, then you have to recognize that that person has been all about themselves. They're not going to let you fully exist in the relationship, and you have to save yourself and get out. Now, when you get out physically, you've probably left your heart behind. So here's the hard part is that your emotions might be trauma bonded to that person. And that comes from that cycling of love bombing and devaluing. And that cycle is what kind of hooks you in. So if that person has been all about themselves and then they become aggressive, but then they're remorseful, you can get clear of that and then hold good boundaries and see through their actions if they are sincere. But you should be in a safe place watching that from a distance
Yeah.
because that is likely going to be a continuing issue for them. And it is very hard for someone to change those core things. If it was an explosion, kind of a one off, and they're generally caring and have been honoring and respectful of you, again, you have to get clear of that. But then you might be able to restore more quickly, you may be able to restore that relationship.
Mm. Yeah, I love evaluating, like, what has been the history? Have they always been all about themselves? And I know for me, I had such an outward lens that I used to notice all of his flaws, and when it seemed like he was about himself, and I really wasn't paying attention to when I was making it all about me, and I was so unhappy that, like, how dare he be in a bad mood, or how dare he be depressed or be having a hard time because he needs to be like this uplifting, happy guy for me all the time, and this doesn't work for me, and I really had to come into acceptance of all of who I was to even accept all of who he was, and know that humans have bad days. We had to support each other through that, right? Hmm. How do you think that anxiety, because I definitely held a pattern of anxiety. I was always anxious. We had like valid reasons to be anxious. My husband's father ended up being schizophrenic and attacked him
Oh
at work one
gosh.
day. And so I was on edge from that, but then I carried that into especially being a new parent and everything. I just was worried all the time. How does that contribute to an unhealthy relationship pattern?
It can be a lot of underlying reasons for unhealthy relationships. And I think we all have our stuff going into a marriage. And I think what's most important is that we recognize our own stuff as much as possible, get help for it if we need to, spend time talking to each other and sharing and deeply listening.
Mm.
I think in our culture today, we tend to be very distracted. We're all over the place. We're on lots of technology. We don't spend quality time together, getting to know each other on a deeper level. So oftentimes those first years of marriage can get really off kilter. And especially if you're parenting, it gets really, really challenging. But I think deeply listening, praying together, spending time together, understanding each other on deeper levels is really helpful. And if you have anxiety, identifying what are the triggers and what kinds of things you can do to self calm and what you might need from your husband, and whether that's I need space
Mm.
or I need help. Either one is valid. And letting yourself ask for that, because I think as women too, we don't ask for our needs to be met. We expect people to read our minds. We expect people to show up without even asking them or letting them know we're having a hard time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I know that I carried everything and did it all because I wanted it to be done, like, perfectly, and
Mhm.
so I wouldn't let him help at all, and then I'd be mad at him that he never helped. I'm so exhausted, but you still can't load the dishwasher correctly, so I just keep doing it all myself, you know? Oh, oh, I love that point about coming into presence though, because that really was the cure for my anxiety was living in the now and being in my body and being focused on the present moment. Do you think that a couple co-creates a toxic relationship? Like, is it a dynamic that like you said, they bring their own stuff and that's what creates the toxicity? Or is it always just one person? You just need to replace that one person?
It really can be both. Typically it it is one person who is all about themselves and then connecting up with a person who's all about other people.
Mm,
So empathic, compassionate, caring people tend to be drawn in by a person who's all about themselves because that's what they want, need. They want somebody who will be all about them. And so that is usually the part of the other person that they start right off the bat in a placating, peacekeeping mode. And when that is the initial setup, the more narcissistic person just eats that up. And so over time, the more empathic person is depleted and more depleted and more depleted. Now they could become passive aggressive. They could become so frustrated and angry that they are also acting out ways that are not healthy. And so when I work with people, I start with let work on your own self care and self understanding and recognizing how you're probably beating yourself up inside your own head. You know, perfectionism is all based on beating ourselves up
mm,
internally for being human. And so looking at the way you talk to yourself inside your own head, and then starting to take ownership of your thoughts and feelings and saying the truth in love and setting good boundaries. And then, like I said before, seeing if that person can grow. Because sometimes people do want to grow. And sometimes if you got married early, you know, people were pretty immature at that point, and there is space to grow. And if the person does decide that they want that growth, great. You can learn to set boundaries. You can walk away when they're having their emotions and let them learn to handle their emotions and you can move forward as a couple. And I've seen lots of couples who have very toxic patterns and they grow past them and they survive. And others where one person is just not a person that you can really be in relationship with because they're just completely about themselves.
mm, mm. Ugh, I love everything that you're sharing. You've got so much knowledge in this and background. I wonder one thing that's coming to mind is somebody I know who has a partner who's not actively like violating their boundaries, but instead they withdraw and they're quiet and they just don't respond to what they're saying. Is that a form of narcissism or is that just like their personality is to just be quiet?
You know, it's interesting because there are so many ways of being dysfunctional in our world, right? So it could be that that person is just very anxious and very self condemning, but it also could be another strategy of a narcissist. And so when you have somebody that's all about themselves and very narcissistic, very controlling, very manipulative, it's almost like they have a huge smorgasbord in front of them of strategies to use, and they'll use whatever works. And if that button works, they keep pushing that button until it stops working. So if you step back emotionally and watch, you'll see, oh, wow, now they're pouting.
Mm,
And oh, they now the pouting's not working. So they're moving to rage. And the rage isn't working anymore on me. So now they're moving to tears. And now they're moving to threats. And then they're moving to threats of suicide because I'm not responding to the threats. So it's like a smorgasbord. And you have to see all of it as manipulative behavior and all of it is just kind of more of the same, but in a different suit.
What do you do with that threat of suicide? Do you just ignore it? Do you call the authorities? How do
I
you
would always call. I would always call because it's either serious or it's not. And either way, you call it out. And so, you know, then you know you've done what you could and you've accomplished, you know, letting them know that this now is out of your hands. It's the same with violence. As soon as someone is out of control, they're out of control. And so if they're out of control, self harmful or out of control, harmful to others, it's no longer your job to sit there and take it. You have to call. So I would call 911 and let them sort it out. Now, of course, then you have to deal with do you feel guilty about that? Absolutely not. They made the choice to make those threats and they have to deal with the consequences of that.
Mm, absolutely. I love the reminder that it's not in your control. It's just not
Mm-mm.
something that you can fix, and they are out of control and need help with that, but we don't have to jump in and save them. And I love to, like, remind my clients guilt is when you have caused harm, you've actually hurt somebody, and them making those choices is not it has nothing to do with you. They've decided to make
Exactly.
those choices. Mm. I love, like I said, your book that it's a journal and it's helping people. What is it really? What would somebody find if they get your book? Is it taking them through like inner child healing, or is it just tell me about how it came into being and what it does?
So we start with the internal self dialogue because that can have become so toxic. And some of us brought that from early childhood experiences, and some brought it from those kinds of relationships. But either way, we have to address that first because if we're still beating up on ourselves, we can't pull out of that fog with another person. And so that's the most important first piece. And we start with that. So there is throughout the book, I kind of give insights, perspectives, information, and then a bunch of journal prompts. And some people love to journal and some hate it. So you can use those just to think through what I'm asking you to think through. And then we move into how did the relationship start? What's going on? How do you assess sort of the gaslighting, the isolation, the love bombing and devaluing and the cycling of all that and where you are you trauma bonded to this person, which means that you feel hooked in by them, even though you know it's a negative relationship. Then we talk about boundaries and that sort of thing too. And throughout, like I said, journal prompts. But then we work through how to recognize the rational mind from the emotional mind. Because what's true about us is that we get really confused with the like we can have all the rational ideas set in motion and recognize I need to get out of this relationship or I need to set boundaries or I need to A, B, and C. But our emotions are all kind of hooked in and trauma bonded to this person still. What we need to realize is that our emotions are attached at a deep, deep level and our emotions may not be on board. We have to use our rational mind to make a wise decision and then drag our heart along for the ride. And it may take a while to heal that. You can love and decide to leave. You don't wait until your heart's on board. You have to make a rational decision.
Mm, love that. It sounds really powerful and can help so many people. Tell everybody where they can find you and go find your book.
So my website is nofoggydays.com. And you can also get there by therapisttalks.com. YouTube is Therapist Talks also. And on my website, you'll find a newsletter you can sign up for information. You'll find blogs. You'll find my book link and also my connector to the YouTube channel.
Oh, I love it. Nofoggydays.com. That's awesome. Therapist Talks on YouTube. I love your YouTube channel. You give so much, and I love that you're sharing it and getting all this, necessary, needed information out to people who desperately need it, but may not be able to talk to you one on one or somebody else. So it's really beautiful the work that you're doing. Thank you so much
Thank,
for being here today.
thank you so much, Beth. It's been a pleasure.